Nomad Capitalist started with the idea that the places that you think are safe perhaps aren't nearly as safe as you think, whether it's banks, places to invest, whatever it may be. And that places that you think aren't safe, places that you've written off or maybe haven't even heard of, are perhaps safer places to earn higher returns and have more stability with your investments. Today, I'm going to share with you an article asking if this is the death of cities in America, and tell you exactly why I think now is the right time to look at an international investing strategy. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson here at Nomad Capitalist. My team of over 30 people, our network of global experts, and yours truly help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where they're treated best. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. I'm going to share with you today 3 reasons why I believe investing in big cities, in dying Western countries, is not the strategy that it once was. It's not the surefire win that it perhaps once was. But first, I'm going to share with you an article from The Hill. It's written by Kristen Tate, and it goes like this. This year, 2020, ended the boom of cities that started in the 1990s. The mirage of cities buffeted by white-collar jobs and supported by the wealthy who pay bloated tax rates is over. It's easy to blame this on the coronavirus, but a combination of factors heralded the slowdown in places like New York and fueled population growth in smaller cities and suburbs across some regions of the country. Significant numbers of each social class decided it was no longer worth living in major metropolitan areas. What developed is a cascade of residents leaving large cities in blue states. The losers included New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, and the District of Columbia. New York lost at least 300,000 residents. San Francisco saw 90,000 postal changes of address go away, while its median apartment rent fell by 20%. LA recorded more than 25,000 move-outs. Chicago, 20,000. The DC, 15,000. More cities that sustained growth in the last decade also face severe falls in interest as people increasingly move, the article says, to places in the Sun Belt. Phoenix became one of the fastest growing, or retained its spot as one of the fastest growing places in the country. Its population now larger than Boston. Other winners are Nashville, where people have been moving, like Ben Shapiro, where home prices continue to surge, Las Vegas, Charlotte, and others. Now, for me, I've talked for a long time about investing in large cities outside of the West. And I've been hearing from a lot of you who have told me that you've had your rents in these Western countries cut off. I had a gentleman recently tell me that his rent was ordered to be reduced by the government. He's the landlord, and the government said, you're actually charging too much, effective immediately. You need to lower the rent. And by the way, you can't change it for the next several years. They can print more money, they can inflate the value of the money, but you can't increase your rent. And so one of the things that I've talked about is, it's one thing to have some kind of tenant protections. I don't think anybody here is saying that we should be throwing people out on the street for no good reason. But in the West, and I've said it's a culture thing, the culture of many developed countries is moving towards, if you have wealth, you are evil. And that is showing up in everything, including if you're a landlord, you're evil, and you should give people free rent. You should be responsible for paying the mortgage, but you shouldn't collect the rent. The rent can't go up. You've got to give people all kinds of different, everything that goes with that. And so I've said, go to places that are more landlord friendly. Go to places that have higher growth. Go to places that have lower taxes. Because if you look at a place like New York City, I know people who own property in New York City. They make what sounds like a pretty good income, and then you figure out how much they've got to pay in property taxes. And then you figure out how much they have to pay on taxes on the rent they're collecting. They're not left with that much, quite frankly. And I think for so many people who, for all the years that Nomad Capitalist has been around, and for all the years before we've been around, people who have been saying New York is a sure thing, Los Angeles is a sure thing. People are always going to want to go to Los Angeles. That's where the movie industry is. Except it's actually not really anymore. Not only are there movie industries cropping up and growing in other parts of the world to serve growing middle classes in other parts of the world, but The U.S. movie industry has largely moved out of Los Angeles to other parts of the U.S. and overseas. Why? Because California doesn't treat people the best. Imagine some of the most liberal people in the world in Hollywood have said, California has too many taxes, too many expenses, and too many regulations even for us. And so what was a sure thing? These big cities in the West is no longer a sure thing. You know, it's interesting, Jim Rogers talked about if you were a smart guy in 1800, you'd go to London. 1900, New York. 2000, you'd go to Singapore. You'd go to Asia. And I think that, you know, you have these legacy brands that are not only the US, but also the UK. I'm sure you'd see some of these numbers in other Western countries as well. You have Western countries where people are increasingly able to work remote. And quite frankly, do I want to be figuring out what the latest suburb to pop is? You know, I talked about living in Arizona in the US, and you could have said at one point that living in Queen Creek or investing in Maricopa, these kind of exurbs outside of Phoenix, that was a great place to invest because it was cheap and it had nowhere to go but up. Except eventually tastes changed. And since people in Western countries do have more flexibility in terms of remote work than emerging countries do, people decided, you know what, after a while, this thing living 50 miles away from the city center ain't for me. I'm tired of living in the boonies. The same thing happened when I spent 6 months in Los Angeles right before the financial crisis. And I started to see the cracks, and I started to see people moving out of the Victor Valley and these cities that were, 2 hours away from Los Angeles. And the minute they got foreclosed on, they moved right back into renting in, Los Angeles or Culver City or, wherever they were living before. And so if I'm an investor, I understand people are moving to Nashville. Maybe there's an opportunity there now. But you know what? What happens when Nashville, becomes not the popular place to go? I've talked for years about investing in places that are up and coming, where the economy is growing. I think especially Asia is an interesting place. I've talked about Cambodia. I think the capital city. You have jobs that are coming there that aren't as remote. You have people that are coming and investing. You have a demand for things like hotels. And so, I've done well investing in places like that. You look at a country like here in Colombia, Bogota. I understand Bogota may not be everyone's number one lifestyle choice. I happen to like it. But from an investment standpoint, you look at an emerging country, people are generally moving to the capital. You may not have that in the United States. You don't have it in countries like Australia or perhaps South Africa, where the capitals are these kind of, created places. But you do have it in a lot of emerging economies. You go to Georgia, we've talked about. Villages are emptying out as young people move to the one place that they can move, to Tbilisi. You go to Colombia, you're going to see millions of people moving into Bogota. You go to Phnom Penh. You go to so many of these countries and other countries that I think are yet to open up. You could look at, the Vietnams or any of these places. There's still a migration to the cities. Are they going to skip over some of the, industrial revolution stuff that made cities in the U.S. and other Western countries great? Perhaps. But this idea that remote work is going to be everywhere, you're not going to have that in a country where you've got a textile industry. And so, the challenge that I see is there's no more sure thing investing in the West. People thought, people are always going to move to Chicago. You'll always have people interested. No, but you probably will, in my opinion, have a higher likelihood that someone will want to live in the center of Phnom Penh, Cambodia, or Tbilisi, Georgia, or Bogota, Colombia, or insert any other capital city in a developing country here. And you can pay a lot less, and you can be, in my opinion, a lot less sensitive to, the trends of which suburb in Nashville people want to live in today and the changing tastes that happen in a place like the U.S. The reality is, I don't think the U.S. has learned its lesson. Even in lower tax states, look at what Arizona just did. If you make $250 a year or more, they just basically doubled your state tax rate. So the idea that a Tennessee or an Arkansas is not going to do the same, the culture of the country like the United States is increasingly tax people who have capital, and that is landlords, for example. Whereas the countries that we talk about are going often in the opposite direction. They used to hate the rich. They used to have communism. They used to be basket cases, and now they are reforming, and they're seeing the benefits, and they are seeing their people joining an emerging middle class. And why would they have a political will to change that? Whereas in the US, the political will is to go after wealthy people and to make them pay for more of the costs. I don't want to invest in a place where people are increasingly coming after me. They want to raise my property taxes, and they want to make it more difficult and impose more regulations and make it difficult for me to make an income. Even if the actual income is pretty lightly taxed in a place like the US, you can have higher and higher property taxes. You can have rent moratoriums. I talked to my friend in Cambodia who was renting out stuff for his fund. He said, we collected like no less rent this year than we normally would. Nobody didn't pay their rent. And we have full occupancy. And I think if you drove around the US right now, you would find that that's a pretty rare thing. And so lower taxes, fewer regulations, the death of the sure thing. To me, the sure thing is that countries around the world that have already started to develop along the trend of over the last 70 years, you've had extreme poverty go from over 50% of the population to now under 10. That's going to continue. There wasn't a lot of extreme poverty by global standards in the Western world. The countries that have been reduced and that are emerging are now creating middle classes that want to consume products. They're getting better jobs. They have more money. And you are going to see growth in these economies that I think is a lot more predictable than, again, figuring out which suburb of Little Rock is going to be the hot place to go, being leveraged to 95%, hoping the US dollar doesn't continue to decline. For me, this is just more evidence that the idea of the sure thing is dead. Nomad capitalists are looking for the next big thing. I don't think that's in the West. How can Nomad capitalists help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.